why we need those connections. And when we don't have them, it is stressful. When we have them, it's renewing. And so we go to these environments and it's like, finally we're being fed and we soak it up. But it's like, how do we take that experience and bring it back into our normal life? What happens is there's a release that happens to allow for the connection. And then there's a reassociation. So what was a limitation because of the connection starts to become an asset. In other words, you bring that resource, that part back in, and you go, wow, I'm aware of this. I feel this. I can communicate from feeling it. What it is that we want to succeed as men, but we were never given the tools, which means that we never saw any man doing it. So we don't know how to do it as a man. We certainly weren't taught how to do it. We weren't taught the science or the physiology behind it. We didn't have safe spaces to learn how to do it. And as you said, the culture didn't encourage us to be authentic or vulnerable. So yeah, we're struggling in relationships.
An exploration of trauma, transformation, and triumph. Your healing starts here. And we are back today with another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkins, your host. And today I have with me Mr. Owen Marcus. He is a pioneering coach and an author for integrative emotional psychology and attachment theory in men's emotional connection. Now, he has quite a resume. He's been featured in everything from Men's Health, the New York Times, ABC News, The Today Show, and his work has been endorsed by leading figures like Esther Perel and Sue Johnson. I'm very excited to get into a conversation with him today because he knows all the science behind somatic therapy and how this works. And he's going to tell us all about this and all about himself. So thank you, Owen, for being here with us today. I appreciate you coming to spend the hour with us.
Thank you, Amber. It's an honor to be here. I want to serve you and your audience. And I really love that you're championing trauma. It's for so long hasn't gotten its due. And I'm appreciating people like you that really give it a voice for not only trauma, but what people suffer through. And there are actually a lot of ways to get through it that it's been in the works for many years, or now science is accepting it and medicine's accepting it. And it's great that people like you are sharing those.
I think there's a lot of trauma. I was reading a statistic. There's like 70% of all people have had some type of traumatic experience. And I almost think it's more than that because on whatever level, small or large, people deal with trauma on a regular. And so I think it's so valuable that people learn how to navigate through trauma and navigate through the emotions that come with trauma, because I'm an advocate here for not stuffing emotions. I don't think that's ever a good thing, but learning how to navigate through them, I think is super important. So I love having guests like yourself come on here and share your expertise and tell us all about how we can navigate that just a little bit better.
Yeah, I got into it because in hindsight, I realized I had trauma. Now, like you're sort of inferring, I didn't have a lot of major trauma or the blunt force trauma that we normally think of as trauma. But what I realized that pretty much all of us have what I call micro trauma or stress. And once you understand the physiology, you understand that it's the same physiology. And so you can have a lot of little traumas, or they now call it small t traumas, and still have the same cumulative effect of one or a few major traumas. And one of the problems with the little traumas or the micro traumas is because we don't see it as traumatic, we don't see the cumulative effect of that, we sort of write it off, and we don't really understand the impact it's having on our physiology or our health or emotions or relationships. But more and more people, and I primarily now work with men, start to discover that, particularly when they start reading or working with us, that, oh, maybe I didn't have real trauma, but I've had that effect of trauma. And that effect, the accumulated effect of chronic stress or trauma is taking me out of, being connected to myself, my own physiology, my own ability to be really present and powerful, but also my ability to be connected to other people in an authentic way and really live the fulfilling life that I want to live.
So I'm glad that, I'm glad you're doing the work, first of all, but also that you're working with men, because I obviously have a lot of interaction with ladies, but I do believe that, men also struggle through trauma, and there's not a ton of resources that I have found. I think now with trauma becoming more of a a common used word. There's more and more things popping up, but I'm anxious to hear more about what's kind of led you to specifically working just with men.
To go back, back in the late 70s, I was living in Boulder, Colorado. I had a roommate in my house, had given up his law practice of 8 years to come out to Boulder to study all this. And he argued his case so well. I said, all right. I'm going to try it. And I tried it. And I spent 4 years in Boulder learning all this. And so I got to study with the people that were really developing what is now somatic psychotherapy, somatic body therapies, which are really therapies that integrate the soma, the body, with the emotions and the physiology and trauma, and now attachment theory, which is how we connect. And so they were integrating all that. And back then, those therapies were really on the fringe. And now those therapies are the hottest therapies to study for a lot of reasons. One, because they really work, and they're actually fun for the practitioner and the client. And so I started back then in the late 70s, and I started to realize how uptight I was. And so I went through these processes. In the course of a year, I lost 20 pounds of tension. I was never fat. My body was so tight that I didn't walk, I waddled. And I gained close to an inch in height. As my body let go, I literally just stretched out. So I say that just to give you a sense of how physically tight I was. But most of that physical tension was from emotional stress. And then I later realized in graduate school that I had dyslexia throughout my whole life. And that was why I struggled with school. And that was a stressful experience. And then with a speech impediment and a few other things like ADD. And then later on, I realized I had Asperger's syndrome, which I think, one, that was an effect of part of the stress, the trauma that I've accumulated, but also it was one of the causes of it. Trying to cope with these challenges just made it more stressful for me as a kid. And then, I would go through all these different kinds of somatic therapies. My body would change, my emotions would change. But about 30 years ago, I realized my relationships, particularly, with my partner, was not really changing. And it came down to one night, this woman and I were sitting on my couch. She was saying to me, "Owen, I do not feel you." And I would give her all these reasons why she should feel me. And after a few minutes of her being really patient and persistent, and me finally realizing that that's what I was doing, giving her reasons, but I was not connecting with her emotionally, I finally saw that, no, I'm not connected to my emotions, which got me into working with men, which I thought was going to be a weird thing I didn't want to do. But I go, well, maybe if I think it's so weird, I have a resistance to doing it. Maybe I should try it. And that led me to where I am now, where I pretty much exclusively work with men. And I work with men using all the things I've learned over all these decades with physiology, stress, trauma. And one of the beautiful things about working with men, and I was one of them, if you asked me back then when I started, what was I feeling emotionally, I would look for the closest door out of the room because I wouldn't want to answer it. One, because I didn't know how to answer it. And two, I really didn't know what I felt emotionally. But what I found from over the decades of working with men, you can pretty much ask any guy what's happening with his body and you'll answer it. And you keep asking questions that sort of take him deeper into his somatic or body experience, he will start to naturally connect to his emotions for a few different reasons. And so we sort of go in the back door with men around their emotional connection by getting them connected to their body, which ends up being actually an easy and often fun experience for men.
Is this something that they come to you with an issue, like they're having issues in their relationships or issues in their career, and they don't realize what the problem actually is, and then it allows you to go deeper with them? Or do they come to you knowing that their emotions are crazy and they don't really know where to go with that? I mean, what is kind of the main purpose that you see a lot of men feeling a need for this? Because my experience talking to different men, even on this platform, is a lot of men are taught through society, I believe, that you're supposed to be the strong leader, like the one that just pushes through, and you're not necessarily supposed to go feel your emotions and be the emotional being, although that's false. But it seems like this is an issue in culture. So I'm curious, what drives men to this type of therapy?
I think it's both those things, but primarily the first one that, and you nailed the top two, relationships. Yeah, as men, we don't get into something unless we want it and we think we can win at it. So we start these relationships and we think we can succeed at it. at these relationships. And one of my things I do with my partner, she's a couples therapist. We do trainings and retreats. We're doing one in Costa Rica in a few weeks for couples. So I really get to see the dynamic in that situation. And so often what it is that we want to succeed as men, but we were never given the tools, which means that we never saw any man doing it. So we don't know how to do it as a man. We certainly weren't taught how to do it. We weren't taught the science or the physiology behind it. And we didn't have safe spaces to learn how to do it. And as you said, the culture didn't encourage us to be authentic or vulnerable. So yeah, we're struggling in relationships. We work a lot with men that, might be successful in their career, but it's not fulfilling for them. So that's another reason they come. And/or, they're maybe successful in their career, but not successful at home. And yes, the gestalt of, okay, something's wrong here. Yeah, I realize that I'm sort of the consistent variable. And they often tried therapy and other things, but so many of the therapies out there, at least traditionally, have been more cognitive or top down. So they help you to understand what the problem is. But what I say to a lot of guys is understanding it's only the beginning. You got to change what drives it, which is more in the body and the physiology, which gets a lot of men interested, like, oh, that sort of makes sense. And you're sort of taking it out of the emotional realm. We're not denying it, but we're saying it's more a physiological or stress thing than it is, oh, you're bad, you're broken, you're stupid, you'll never get the emotional thing. No, we say, no, it's the cultural and it's the physiological or somatic part, and we can help you with that.
Do you think that sickness resonates in the body? Like there's a book that I've read, and you've probably read it too, because it comes up a lot here. The body keeps the score. And do you believe that if we don't deal with these emotional things, that it can promote sickness and autoimmune disorders and different types of things can manifest in the body because of it?
100%. Vessel's book, which is one you just referred to, is right on. It's sort of a composite, a lot of different therapies that almost every one of them I've either learned or tried. I used to have an integrative medical clinic in Scottsdale for close to 20 years. We had different practitioners, physicians, and others in my clinic, and we get referrals from some of the top docs in the country. And, these docs were, either standard allopathic docs or maybe holistic, but they weren't getting the results that they would get with other patients, and they wanted to help their patients. So they'd send them to us. And inevitably, the variable that was taking them out of their treatments being successful was what you're talking about, the stress component. It was locked in the body. Now, the guy that was a physician in Hanselia that wrote the book on stress, 60 years ago, which was called The Stress of Life, said that fascia, which is that connective tissue that really holds everything together and becomes scar tissue, is the organ of stress. And we sort of know that. So when we have a lot of stress, we get tight. But over years, we just get tighter and tighter, and it snowballs, and then it's self-perpetuating. So when we can downregulate the acute stress and the chronic stress that's held in our body, we literally start changing our physiology, and we go from operating in a narrow band to a much broader band where we have a lot more resiliency. So when a stress comes in, we don't brace against it. We go, oh, okay, yeah. It's more like an athlete dealing with stress. They go, all right, I'm excited. I'm leaning into it. It's a challenge rather than I'm bracing against it and I'm going to go into the stress response.
I'm curious about this because I went through a pretty stressful circumstance a couple of years ago, went through a divorce, and that's very stressful. And I found myself, like you were saying, in my back and in my shoulders, just like constantly tension. So I do believe that was fascia. And I've worked with a movement specialist. He works with a lot of athletes, and he does like all the cupping and things like that. And it's helped a lot. But what I'm hearing you say is that you can definitely treat it like that, but that's almost just a Band-Aid, where the root of the problem is dealing with the stress in which that comes or that's being built up as.
Yeah, it snowballs. And what happens is that we have stress events or maybe traumatic events as a kid, and then we have cultural impingement on who we are. And then, so we create what I call like a survival strategy or coping mechanism. And what I tell people, look, great, it worked. You survived, you're here. Now, the downside is strategy or coping mechanism causes limitations in certain realms. Like a lot of my clients are successful entrepreneurs. And part of the reason they're often successful is part of their coping strategy. Like I have a few guys now that they get really good at disassociation, which we can talk more about, with shutting everything off because that's how they survived as a kid with the stress that they had. And so when chaos would happen at work, they became the go-to man for like, all right, we'll give it to John because he doesn't get flustered. That's a great upside. The downside is at home, he could not connect with his wife. And, that was like destroying the relationship because his wife wanted to connect to him. And he was sort of like me going, oh, okay, let me tell you what I'm thinking, but that didn't do it. So, these men are learning how to not limit the positive aspects of these coping mechanisms, but go to what was causing it, which is what drives, in this case, disassociation, which is from the freeze response. So in survival or trauma, when we can't fight or we can't run, we're hardwired to do that third thing, which comes from, our reptilian ancestors of being able to freeze or pretend we're dead so that we might not have the predator eat us, or if he does, we don't feel it. And if we don't get eaten, we literally shake that off and we downregulate and we reset ourselves and we don't have any PTSD. But in our culture, when this stress or trauma happened, we didn't get to go through the physiological recycling or release. So that trauma, to some extent, or stress stays in our body and it gradually accumulates and perpetuates.
So I would love to talk more about disassociation. It's something I've looked at a little bit, and I would love to talk more about that. But before we go any further, because this question's been in the back of my mind since we started, can you explain to my listeners what somatic therapy is?
Yeah, so soma is body. So anything with a body, I guess, would be called somatic therapy. Now, we got somatic therapies that are more body work, which could be rolfing, with manipulating the soft tissue to get rid of the chronic stress in the body and realign the body. It could be, I guess even massage, maybe acupuncture. It could be a lot of different body therapies. I mean, you could even stretch it and probably include yoga some. But most of the time these days, when people are talking about somatic therapy, they're talking about somatic psychotherapy. And then the two guys that started it were Ron Kurtz, and he started a therapy called Akomi. And he was my first teacher back in the 70s in Boulder. The guy was brilliant. And he studied with some of the predecessors that were doing somatic therapy, but he really brought in mindfulness. And he was very gentle in his approach. He'd ask someone to stand up and he would just start working with the person and ask the person a few questions very slowly, quietly, gently. Within a minute or two, often that person was sobbing. And all he did was ask a few questions. It was like he was this wizard doing this thing. I couldn't understand what he was doing, but studying with him and everyone else, I finally realized and then developed my own similar approach. And then the other person was Peter Levine. And Peter Levine was the one that really brought out this phenomena of the freeze response. And I remember he was in a Rolfing conference. He was also a Rolfer like me originally. And he told this story that Dr. Rolf, who developed Rolfing, said, Peter, you're too small to be a Rolfer. He went and got a couple of PhDs from Berkeley. And then he started studying what happens to the body when we have trauma. And he realized that, normally we either run or we fight. But he realized when particularly mammals cannot do the first two, we default to this freeze response. And I used to live in North Idaho. I lived up in the mountains. I had a meadow in front. We had a lot of deer there. So if one of the local cougar came down, hacked a deer, knocked the deer down, but he wasn't really hungry. He said, I'll come back. The deer is dead. Well, a few minutes later, the deer would come out of shock, wake up and tremble for a few minutes, literally shake off all the charge and walk away, and he'd have no PTSD. Well, we don't ever get to do that. And Peter realized that. So he developed his therapy, which is now called somatic experience, to teach people how to release that charge, literally or metaphorically, how to shake it off. So your chronic level of your nervous system goes from that sympathetic state, which is the survival state, drops down or relaxes down into the parasympathetic, which is the relaxed state, which what I call like the idle, where our nervous system should be 99% of the time. And that's where all healing, creativity, connection, all the things we want occur in that state.
You hear the term, like, just shake it off. there's actually science behind that. So that's interesting that you bring that up. I've interviewed other people that do like somatic stuff, but it's like I always just like to clarify, and especially for people that are listening, that maybe they've not listened to a lot of the other episodes, and just to have you clarify. Let's talk a little bit about disassociation, because that is where the trauma is so bad that they disconnect from it and then sometimes don't even remember that trauma. Is that correct?
Yeah. And we all do this. And that ability is not a bad thing. We need to do that on a micro level or a macro level. Where it becomes limiting is we get stuck there. So we've had the trauma or stress and we've disassociated from it. And there's a fellow that we've had on our program called Dick Schwartz. He developed IFS, or internal family systems, which is a therapy that basically takes all the parts, because when you disassociate, it's like that part of you that had to check out, leave, just sort of left, literally, metaphorically, sort of, floats around you. So it's there, but you're not connected to it. And in some way, it has a physical analog, often a place in your body or a composite of places. So, but we're not connected to it. So when we can connect to it, be it through like Dick's work or our work, what happens is there's a release that happens to allow for the connection. And then there's a reassociation. So what was a limitation because of the connection starts to become an asset. In other words, you bring that resource or that part back in and you go, wow, I'm aware of this. I feel this. I can communicate from feeling it. And I have an ability to use this part. But you never lose the advantage of that disassociation in the sense that, like we said earlier, some of these guys get very well disassociated, and that allows them to be really focused on the task at hand when they need to be. But we want to be able to go back to being connected. And the core of that is being connected to our own experience, which is where we start with our work. And some of that's that somatic mindfulness, where we get men connected to their own experience. Once we do that, then it's really easy to connect to other people and for them to connect to us.
Is this done through talking to them, like getting them to rewire how they think and reframe their perspective of things?
It's done for talking to them, but we're so conditioned in this culture to think that everything needs to be through our brain or our mind, and our mind's technically even more than our brain. And so we give them a model to understand the meta picture, the framework in, because particularly for guys, we need a little understanding to accept that maybe this new thing would work. But really, we go from the bottom up rather than the top down. So yeah, we give them a little understanding. If I was working with you, Amber, I'd start asking you questions about what are you feeling in your body? And then I'm looking at you, you're nodding your head. And so I might say, okay, as you're nodding your head, what's that associated? What feeling, what emotion you're having? And I just start asking all these questions, or getting you to respond to what's your body experiencing, what's the emotional meaning, or maybe relational meaning around what your body's doing, because our bodies are unconscious and our emotions are like three legs of the same stool, and they all are sort of below the level of conscious awareness, but they really drive the bus. Now, the fellow that developed polyvagal theory, Dr. Stephen Porges, talks about how, and his research has found how 80% of the key nerve, the vagus nerve, goes from the gut up to the brain, and only 20% goes down. And so he's really shown what we all sort of know, that, yeah, we have this gut brain, but really it's our body that drives us, and and their unconscious and our emotions that drive our thoughts. And so we have an experience, and then we frame it intellectually, and we think that's all of it. But really, it's our body and our emotions that are driving it. And not only when men can understand that, but when they can access those resources, their lives get much richer, and they have a lot more tools in their tool belt.
This is very interesting to me. I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit over my head, but science always is, and that's why I find it intriguing. Have you ever heard of using magnets to release trauma inside of the body?
Well, I worked with a guy that was a physician that his whole therapy was using these big magnets and on key acupuncture points. And he was world renowned for helping people with Lyme. And he had a lot of people in from Europe. And I didn't know this, but he said it's like Denmark and Sweden have the worst Lyme cases in the world because of all the deer. So people would come to his clinic for his treatment, and his treatments were using these magnets. And he didn't really, he had theories, but he couldn't really explain it, but it worked. So yeah, there's a lot of therapies out there. There are, completely non-invasive, not harmful, not dangerous that work. And often the consistent variable is that they're working through the body. And I think what essentially happens is that they allow the body to release and reset. Like when I had my integrated clinic, people would get these amazing things that, they thought it was like a miracle. But really it wasn't. What it was when we took the stress from their body, we helped them release it. That was more an accurate way of saying it. They dropped down to that parasympathetic state, the relaxed state, so the body could heal. This is what I realized in my clinic decades ago, was that when we're in a survival state or constant threat state or PTSD or, call it whatever you want, we are oriented to surviving, as we should be. We are hardwired to do that on an acute or immediate level. We're not hardwired to do it on a chronic or constant level. And that wears us down. And it literally wears out our vital energy, our life force, or chi or ki, the acupuncturists would talk about. We don't have the resources to rebuild ourselves. But, I have these amazing stories of people that would often fly in to see me. And once we downregulated them, their incurable conditions would cure themselves because their body said, all right, I'm not, running in circles or on the treadmill, trying to survive. I can take all that energy, relax. And then the body goes, well, now my priority is to heal. So I'll heal. And for some of these people, it was that simple.
There's a lot to unpack with all of this because we are energetic beings. If a lot of this has to do with energy, the thing for me is the body, the mind, it's such a magnificent thing. And that we can use all of these different ways to heal in multiple different ways without going straight to pharmaceuticals. But it seems like here in this country, like if you're having an issue, they're quick to put you on some type of pharmaceutical. And it's disheartening because I feel like I don't even feel like it's really a Band-Aid, because at this point, it's just like here, take this and, you're going to be on it forever. When we're not being taught how to regulate emotions, I think it's really sad that kids in school are not being taught how to regulate their emotions. And then we grow up into adults and then we go through our entire life not really knowing how to regulate these things. It does manifest in the body in some way, shape, or form. And then we're left trying to figure these things out. And we a lot of times don't even try to figure it out until life gets unbearable. Something in our life starts to deteriorate to the point, now I've got to go try to figure this out because depression's getting to me, or you're leaning into some type of crutch. Drugs, alcohol, sex is a huge crutch. Like, this is what our culture teaches though. And it's really sad. I'm curious with mental health being, mental health is huge, and we see that number of people struggling with mental health growing, which is alarming. With mental health disorders, do you see a correlation with the things that you're talking about, and maybe people that come to you that maybe have mental health disorders that can see improvements from using somatic therapy?
I have over decades. Now, in my current business, Mel, we're not therapists, we're not physicians, even though, we train them and, we have them as part of our team or community. We're just helping these men, and the help, can be therapeutic. We're not working with acute issues, but yes, we get a lot of guys that, are recovering addicts that, have been or maybe still have lingering depression or whatever. And they often tried other things, but, maybe it got them started, but didn't get them to where they want. Because you're right. So often, particularly with men, we don't do anything until we have to do something. And almost inevitably, that last thing is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's been a chronic condition that's been building for a long time. And we sort of say that to them. And, these guys just start to realize that, and they're willing to do what it takes to deal with the chronicity of it and not just the acuteness of it. In this culture, we like to diagnose things for a few different reasons, physically or emotionally, and there's a place for it. Every year we get more emotional or mental diagnoses. Growing up, which, as I said, later realizing I had dyslexia and Asperger's. And, it's like I could probably name a few more of the more recent conditions as labels of what I had and other people have. And so our traditional system is set up where we can't really treat anything until it's diagnosed. And what you're suggesting is, you just roll up your sleeves, look at what the underlying cause is, and work with unpacking it, and hope and usually have it happen that you deal with the underlying causes, and the symptoms not only are abated, they really disappear because you're dealing with a cause.
I'd like to see more people take that path, at least initially. You being a holistic practitioner, I know when I hardly ever go to the doctor, but when I had kids and we had to start taking them to see regular doctor visits, we looked for a holistic doctor. And when you're struggling with your health or you don't know what's wrong, to see someone who's going to execute all of the other options before they're so quick to put you on a round of antibiotics or put you on a round of, some type of medicine. It's very refreshing. And I wish that we would adopt a little bit more of that in this country. But I believe that's why it's important for people to speak out on these things as well, that, hey, there are other options. Like, just because we're not being told that there's so many other modalities to help you heal, there really is. And it breaks my heart because I feel like people don't have to experience the level of trauma that a lot of times they're carrying around. And it makes me really sad to know that sometimes it's just that people don't know. They just don't know there's other treatments out there.
And they don't, you don't think of that. But when you try the traditional and it's not giving you what you want, most people start to become a little more open-minded, and they go, well, Joe and then Sally said this guy was good, and what do I have to lose other than a little time and money? And they try it and they go, wow. And then so often after you try one thing, then you're just hooked and you're trying another and another. And you go from, having chronic pain or depression or whatever it might be to feeling way better than you ever thought possible. There's a book that's been out a good year now called Good Energy by Casey Means. She's a Stanford trained physician, and her brother, who also went to Stanford for the undergraduate, but Harvard Business School graduate degree. And he was a big lobbyist for the drug companies. And they wrote this book about what is good energy, and more from the nutritional part, and the medical part, that says that, yeah, what you're saying, Amber, that, with the right information and some simple changes, like diet being one of them, you can make a huge difference in your health. And then what happens is, again, you get more energy, you get more open, and you start making, I think, the best investment you can, which is in your health, your physical health, your emotional health, and your relational health.
Can you take us through a little bit of like what that transformation is like? So obviously you work with people, it's like anything else. If you want to see results, you got to work at it, right? You got to put in the work to see the results. But typically, if you have a guy come in and see you, like, how long till he starts feeling relief from the trauma or maybe the PTSD or the things that really ails him? Like, what does that journey look like?
Yeah, it could be in several forms. I mean, I have some people I work with one-to-one, which is private, but pretty much everything else has a communal or group aspect. Because I realized 30 years ago doing these men's groups that we really leverage change and the speed and the fun of it when we do it together as guys in an emotionally safe space. And we learn from each other, which is how we learned or didn't learn everything about emotions. We observed our parents, and then we, tried and failed at different things. But when we're in a setting that feels emotionally safe, and this is particularly true for men, we get to see, oh, John's doing this. I never thought I could do that, or be emotional and not be shamed, but actually honored for my vulnerability. And so we walk guys through this. So, sometimes in a session or two, they have a huge shift because of what we do and how we work. And most of the time it takes a few months to turn the corner where not only they, dealt with the immediate concern that brought them in, but they've turned the corner where like, all right, I'm not going to go back. I've not just learned enough of my body, my physiology, my emotions, maybe my relationships have changed enough where even if I wanted to go back, I probably couldn't because I've reset myself. And now, I'm going to get better. It's like the guy, and you probably know him, and I certainly have over the years, guys that get into exercise because they were overweight, out of shape. And they went from going, I never do it to, oh, I'm hating it to, oh, this is not bad to, oh, I like this to becoming athletes. I had a guy years ago that was one of the top ultramarathoners in the Southwest. And he got into it because he was real out of shape. And he got to be like the top in the Southwest because, he really got into it. It became fun. And so that metaphor really applies to this work with our emotions and our health. We get to a point where, we keep reinvesting in ourselves because we see a return.
Well, it's empowering because I know exactly what you're saying. I've worked with a lot of athletes. I used to do photography for fitness, and I worked with a lot of different athletes and heard their stories. And I used to compete myself years ago. It was figure, it's like bodybuilding. But I can attest to this even in my own self-growth. Sometimes you do the things that's hard and it doesn't feel good. It's really hard. And I really I don't want to go back in my mind and pull out these emotions that were difficult at the time. They're going to be difficult to pull out again. But after some time, you start to get empowered because you realize this thing doesn't control me anymore. Now I'm moving ahead. I've taken control of this thing. Now I can tell my mind. And I think it's the same with fitness. Now I can tell my body when it's going to work out. And you start to get so empowered by it that then it's addictive almost. It's like, now I'm addicted to this. I just want to be the best I can be. And so it's really a beautiful thing. Sometimes it's starting to build that momentum that's probably the hardest, and getting people to realize that there's something truly in healing. There is something truly in fitness. Healing, if that's mental, emotional, physical, whatever that looks like, there is something very empowering about that. And I think that's why work like yours is so important, because you're teaching men how, even though they're on their individual journeys, you're teaching them how to be empowered and not let this thing control them any longer.
And I think you're sort of subtly mentioning a real important factor, which we don't give enough credit to, because I imagine part of what was empowering and made your workouts fun was there was a social component, maybe even a little competition. I mean, you went from maybe like, oh, I got to do this alone to doing it with others. And and you support each other. So same thing happens in our work. Guys come in afraid to be vulnerable or authentic. And, we're doing a training at the end of this month down in Joshua Tree. And I know what's going to happen because it happens, it's been happening for really 30 years. And the 20 years I've been doing these trainings is that we come into the space sort of shy, but quickly we realize that this is a safe space and that, we can be vulnerable, we can be honest or authentic. And out there in the other world, we might get shamed, certainly as a guy. But in this setting, we really get to be who we are. And men really are and want to be supportive of each other, which really leverages all the change. And we leave sort of like what you're saying, like, hell yeah, I can do it. I did it. And I can support other men doing it. I want to do more of it. And, when I have my other company, guys would come to our trainings and they go, well, I want to start my own group. And then suddenly we had all these hundreds of groups all over literally the world because, they had one experience and they wanted to share it with other men.
That's so awesome. And what you're describing, I've personally seen in retreats that I've been to. I've been to several retreats. I used to photograph some retreats. And so I was invited to some pretty mind-blowing ones. And there's something about that group experience, like you're saying, there's an energetic, I don't know, it's like an energy that's there. And I think we see the same thing like at business conferences, or it's like now you're around all these like-minded people. Everybody's just filling their mind with whatever this thing is that the conference is around. And there's a certain type of energy where now I'm included. I'm a part of a group. I'm a part of a movement. And there's something so powerful about that. And I love that you do retreats, especially for men, because I think that's something that a lot of women are just like, yeah, I want to go to a retreat. But sometimes guys are like,
And our best referral source are women, and the next to that are therapists. But yeah, And, guys are a little hesitant. That's changing. I mean, I've been doing this long enough where I see guys a lot more open now than they ever have been, but it's always a little scary. And we know that, but quickly that's what you said. They start to have fun. And, and what I hear for so many guys is that, yeah, we had real friends when we were in school or maybe the military, but when those parts of our life ended, real friendships ended. We have colleagues, we have people we might play golf with or have a drink with, but we don't have those authentic friendships. So guys are hungry for that. And we are trailable animals, our genome going back 10,000 years is 99.9% the same. We are meant to have that kind of connection. And when we don't, it is a stress. And attachment theory and the research around it talks about why we need those connections. And when we don't have them, it is stressful. When we have them, it's renewing. And so we go to these environments and it's like finally we're being fed and we soak it up. But it's like, how do we take that experience and bring it back into our normal life, which is what we do with these men in these men's groups. Like the group that I started when I redesigned men's work and men's groups 20 years ago in this small town in North Idaho. 20 years later, we're celebrating, actually this week is 20 years. Over 500 guys have done this group. We have over 60 guys in the current groups. I'm in a Zoom group of some of the expats. We've had a documentary film on it and then later a study on this work. And it's self-perpetuating. Out of this little town in Idaho of 8,000 people, it just grew and mushroomed just because of what we were doing and the natural need for it.
Wow, that's so good. That's so awesome. I love all the work that you're doing. So tell us, how can somebody's listening here, like how can they be a part of one of these retreats?
Well, I think probably the best way to check out what we have is to go to our website, which is MELD, M-E-L-D, which stands for Men's Emotional Leadership Development, but just MELD dot community spelled out. And so it's MELD dot community. And it talks about what we do, the science behind it. We have a lot of free resources. There's a free membership for men. We have even more resources and ways to connect with guys. And we have really four primary things that we do. We have what we call a core program, which is a 10-week online course that I first developed 10 years ago, and it's really evolved over the years. These researchers did a couple-year study on this course that was published in the premier APA journal last year about the effectiveness of this course. So we have that, and every 10 weeks or so, we do another cycle of that. So it's a great introduction. We teach this stuff, but really, again, guys get to experience with other guys. So with everything, it's primarily experiential. And then we have a deep, more intense, smaller, private or group coaching, which I run, and that's called Forge. And then we have our retreats, Prime, which is what we're doing Joshua Tree at the end of February. And then, we have one-to-one coaching. These are all different avenues that guys can connect with us. Everyone can connect through our newsletter. It comes out every week. And again, the men have the option of our free membership. So, we want to really support men. And in that way, women in their, relationships with men. And we give away a lot of free tools. And our goal is to, train men up, as we've been doing for all these years, and have them go out and help other men.
Mm-hmm. And I will say too, I've been to Joshua Tree. I know a little bit about Joshua Tree. It's very, I feel like it's a very spiritual place. And if you're looking for kind of downloads and really just connection with nature, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of that inside of Joshua Tree. I like that you're doing it there because it's a very unique place.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And as you know, at that time of year, the desert's beautiful and we get into the park and, there's a lot of sun. So the people coming from the Northeast go, oh, wow, sun. And, we've used this venue for a while. It was part of an ABC story a while ago. Yeah. And, some of the traditional men's retreats were very confrontational, deprivational. It was like, we're going to push you and break you down. My approach has always been the complete opposite, to support you, to go deep, but not because we're pushing you, but just because we're inviting you, and use that collective phenomena of connection as a resource to go deep and to feel safe. So the venue is beautiful, and guys come back not only changed and refreshed, but one of the unique things about this training is it's not just an experience of training. We teach you in these skills that allow you to apply them at home at work, or if you wanted to start your own men's group.
That's awesome. So you're on, I know you told us where to find you on your website. Are you on social media as well?
Yeah, we're on all the social media platforms.
Awesome. So if you want to connect with him, that's the way to do it. And for anyone that's listening, I think it's a very valuable thing that you're doing. And I think that it's much needed in our culture. And men are genetically, they are leaders. And, regardless, I know that we're kind of in this era of like women being this boss babe or whatever, but we need leaders. We need men to step up and be the leaders that they're really called to be, and so that we can function also like in our femininity and be able to, like you mentioned, have these successful marriages, relationships, family dynamics, and all the things. If you had to give like a final takeaway for my audience, anyone that's listening, what would that be?
Connect to yourself. As I said, I think it starts with connecting to our own experience, and not just through our head, but really through our body. And this is that somatic mindfulness, which is really just being aware of what your body's experiencing. And the power in that is when we can be aware of our body, we're innately telling us that we're safe. Because when we're not aware, we're in that threat response and we're aware of what's outside. But when we start to become aware of what's inside and what we're feeling physically or emotionally, we downregulate, we become safer, and other people perceive us safer. So we start to establish at least the opportunity for more authentic connections. And then from there, as you connect yourself, really, start to risk connecting in a more authentic way to other people.
I love that. Well, I appreciate you so much spending all your time here with us today and just your expertise and sharing with us. I think it's I think it's much needed.
Oh, thank you, Amber.
Hey there, friend. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with us on Through the Trauma podcast. Your presence means more than you know. If this episode has spoke to you or gave you hope or made you feel just a little bit less alone, then I would love it if you would take a second, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who truly needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every listen, it all helps our message get out and reach those who truly need it the most. Healing happens inside of a community, and together we are breaking the silence and creating space for transformation. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not alone.